In this last video of this section, we are going to cover the differences between classes and structs. We will go over what a class is, what a struct is, and when to use one over the other. And we will see some differences between reference types, which is a class, and value types, which is a struct. Let's start with an empty playground, and in this empty playground we will go over the differences between classes and structs. A class is a reference type and a struct is a value type. It will become more apparent what that means shortly. So let's first create our struct. We will create a struct of my struct, so that's the type name, and we will create a property of string. We will also create a method of my method, and in this method we will print out my property. We will also create another method that changes our property. So we will call this method changeProperty, and this will set my property equal to something else. So we will get an error here saying that we cannot assign to property self is immutable. So with value types, we have to mark anything that changes our properties within a method as mutating. So this will allow us to mutate that my property in this method, because normally values are passed around as copies. So if we don't mark this method as mutating, then my property has no way of knowing that it can be mutated because it's passed around as a copy. But by marking as mutating, we know that we are able to mutate this value type. So now let's do the same thing with a class. And we will say class, my class. We will have a my property, which is a string, and a my method that prints our my property. And then we will have a function of changeProperty that change is our my property equal to something else. So we will not get an error here on the method changeProperty, but we will get an error on the my class that says that the my class has no initializer. So with a reference type, we have to create an initializer that sets our my property. So we will say self.myProperty equals to the my property that is passed into our initializer. We did not have to do this in my struct because my struct creates that initializer for us automatically. Now let's see how we can use this my struct in my class and some of the differences on how they react. So let's first create an object from my struct, and we will call this my struct with a lowercase m. So we will create the my struct, and notice that we have this initializer that takes in my property. We will say hello there. And now we will create a my struct2 and set it equal to my struct. Now if we say my struct dot my property equals goodbye, and we print out our my property values by calling my struct dot my method and my struct2 dot my method, we can see that we have goodbye because my struct dot my property was set equal to goodbye, and we have hello there because my struct2 dot my method was set to my struct, and my struct dot my property was equal to hello there. So we can see that even though we are pointing my struct2 to my struct and then mutating the my struct dot my property, they still hold different values. And that's because each time that we set our my struct, so in this case my struct2 equals to my struct, we are setting my struct2 equal to a copy of my struct. And that's what a value type is. It passes copies around so that you can mutate them, and it doesn't matter how you change it because you're only changing that copy and not the actual values in memory. So let's look at our my class, which is a reference type, which points to an address in memory and modifies what's at that address. So we will do the same exercise. We will say var myClass equals myClass that has a myProperty, and we will say hello there. And instead of making this myClass a var like we did above, we will make it a let. And now we will say let myClass2 equals myClass, and we will change the myClass.myProperty and set that equal to goodbye. And autocorrect must have completed that to capital myClass, and we want it to be lowercase. But now if we do myClass.myMethod and myClass2.myMethod, they now both say goodbye. And that's because when we change myClass.myProperty to goodbye, we are going to a specific place in memory and changing that value to goodbye, and both myClass and myClass2 are both pointing to that same address in memory for that property because they're reference types and they're referencing that place in memory. Also notice that we can use let with myClass where we had to use var with myStruct. And the reason for that is because of the struct being a value type, in order for it to have that mutability, we have to make it a var. Whereas a class, we're not actually modifying that class, we are modifying place in memory, and that place in memory is where that property lives, so as long as my property is a var, we can change that address in memory. Thanks for joining me in this section on Swift. We covered a lot in this section, including an overview of Swift, the differences between variables and constants, the differences between explicit and inferred types, program flow, Swift optionals, including when to use them and unwrapping them, creating and calling functions and methods, and the differences between classes and structs. In the next section, we will cover developing single view applications, where we will start building our application for this course.